In our study of the synthesis of yoga, we are reading the chapter titled The Planes of Our Existence. And as we summarized last time, the content so far, Sri Aurobindo points out that if the goal of our spiritual pursuit is a divine realization and manifestation in life, then all the gradations of consciousness, from the spiritual through to the most material, have to be awakened to the divine presence, and it becomes a necessity for the yoga itself to become conscious of these planes of existence, which are otherwise ignored in the more ascetic yogic practices, where the goal is simply to get out into the spirit, abandoning life. We have seen in some the character of, well, in detail, the character of the material world, and then the character of the vital world, and then the complex connections between the two, and the enormous influence that the vital world has on the material and on our own lives. We read last time the three questions Sri Aurobindo poses. Why then are we not normally aware of so much that is behind us and always pressing upon us? The entire vital world is pressing upon not only the physical world, but on us, each one of us individually. And the second question, which he says is for the same reason, why are we not aware of the inner life of other people around us? And he points out, in fact, all of the thoughts and emotions from others around us are impacting us all the time. And a very large proportion of our own thoughts and emotions are actually received from others not only individually, but also from the collective mind of humanity. And the third question is, for the same reason, why are we not aware of the greater part of our own being, which is subconscient or subliminal to our waking mind? And this deeper inner ranges are not only influencing us, but in an occult manner, they are determining our surface existence. And he says the reason why, in answer to all these three questions, is exactly the same. And we saw last time the three questions are related: the life world, the collective consciousness, and then our own individual inner realms. All of these are interconnected, and we are unaware of them, all three, for the same reasons. In fact, these represent not only the proverbial unseen part of the iceberg, as they say, only 1/10 is seen, 9/10 is below the waters. And it's not 9/10 which is unseen, but much more. And in terms of determination of events in the physical world, these have a far greater value. And so he answers this. We read this last time in general, and today we go further in depth. He says, it is because we use normally only our corporeal senses and live almost wholly in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. And it is not directly through these that the life world enters into relations with us. And we read this, we looked at it in a general way, but today we will go further into the nuances. And as you recall, Sri Aurobindo uses words very precisely, and we need to dwell on each. So, we are not aware of these ranges because normally we use only our corporeal senses. This is the first reason. And we live in our physical body, physical vitality, and physical mind. So, corporeal senses, and then he uses physical mind, physical vital, or body. Why corporeal here and physical there? And there's a nuance worth appreciating by dwelling upon. The physical, of course, has to do with the body, but the sense of physical is in opposition more to mental. Physical life, mental life. But when you use the word corporeal, yes, it is also used in relation to our physical body, but the term corporeal conveys much more the sense of the materiality as distinct from ethereality or spirituality. And so when he uses this term corporeal senses, the nuance is these are senses associated with material perception only. And of course, you pause. The moment he says corporeal senses, implied is that there are non corporeal senses. And what are these? He elaborates upon this much more in a later chapter when he speaks of the supramental sense perception. There he goes in depth into the very nature of senses. What are senses really? And we have the habit of associating our senses with some organs. So if your physical organ of sight is damaged, then your sight is damaged. It seems as if it is the physical organ which creates sight or hearing. But if you go further into the operation of the organ is only a translator. It translates the touch of physical light into electrical signals, which then pass through the optic nerve. And so it's not the physical eyeball that sees, it only translates the image of light into electrical signals. It's not the optic nerve that sees, which only transfers it to your brain. Does the brain actually see? And this is a big problem of artificial intelligence. Is your brain actually the seeing thing, or is the software in the brain actually doing the seeing? Because the brain is only processing the signals. But by an introspective process, we come to the conclusion that in fact that which sees is our mind. And the yogic vocabulary describes the mind as the sixth sense, or the only true sense. It is the mind which sees, it is the mind which hears, it is the mind which senses, and so on. And these physical organs are only translating to offer to the mind a certain stream of perception or translation of signals, let's say, of the material perception. The actual seeing taking place in the mind is confirmed through many experiments. Often through hypnosis, we have access to certain operations of the mind which are normally not accessible through to the waking state. But under hypnosis, for example, the mind could be told that from this point on, you will become, the color red will become transparent to your sight. And so you look at the flower, and it's as if you're able to see through, or more pink in this case, you're able to see through it, or at least it seems to your mind. You do not see the color red anymore. Or you can swap colors. From this point on, the color pink will appear to you as yellow. And the person looks at the flower and sees yellow. This kind of switch of color cannot be done if the actual seeing is taking place in the biology. Because it is taking place in the software of the mind, it can easily be modified. And many such unusual changes can be made by the simple suggestion placed in the mind, which shows you the actual seeing operation is taking place in the mind. It is also in the same mind that when there is an unusual physical condition, the mind begins to see beyond and has abnormal perceptions, bypassing the physical senses. And so, when he speaks of normally we use only our corporeal senses, the suggestion is now to explore what is beyond corporeal senses. And in that chapter, which I referred to, Sri Aurobindo explains that ultimately all sense perception boils down to consciousness meeting on the other side. What is essentially there? Consciousness. So if it's your mind which is seeing, then it's the mind which is meeting on the other side. Well, you will say flower. But what of the flower is the mind meeting? Through the light. The light is only translating a particular quality of flower into signals. Just as within our sight there was a translation, out there the light reflects, and as if in the reflection captures or conveys a certain bundle of qualities. Of what? Of the energy patterns which modify the light reflecting. Or when you hear, what are you hearing? A certain knock. And what is that? A vibration that took place in the material, which is then translated by the air and brought to you and conveyed. So, light and air are only conveyors and translators of a different experience into this. What's actually happening there? And when you go into the very nature of substance and reality, you discover it's consciousness projecting a certain bundle of qualities. The light reflecting upon that bundle of qualities is modified by those qualities, and that's what your eyes register and convey to the mind. So ultimately what's happening is consciousness in the mind is meeting consciousness in the flower and its particular qualities. Ultimately, all perception resolves itself into consciousness meeting consciousness. Except in our physical process of sight, it was consciousness meeting consciousness through a chain of conversions and transmissions. In the essential consciousness, consciousness meets consciousness directly, and therefore perception is most complete. At all lower levels, the same thing is now less complete, more translated, more adapted, more converted, more transferred through media, and so on, down to the most material. And in the material body also, when finally your eyesight is damaged because of the organ, what has happened is only the physical connection on which you were dependent has been, well, separated or weakened to such a degree that it no more conveys anything useful. In such a case, interestingly, your brain, if it is still intact, has what is called neuroplasticity. It begins to adapt to try to reach out to perceive through other means. And so, what often happens is through this hearing, the person now develops a highly nuanced perception in which he can even describe who it is based on the quality of sound of footsteps. Or sometimes, even it goes to a level which becomes uncanny. He can make out the person is happy or unhappy based on the footsteps or a nuance of the voice. And at that point, it's as if the mind is trying to perceive the appearance, feelings, and things which would be seen through sight, but through the hearing. If the mind is trained to bypass the physical organs completely, it can go straight and perceive. And you will remember we discussed some time ago the medically recorded example of a person who was born blind. His physical organs of sight were completely dysfunctional, but he was able to see, and no one could make out how or why, except he became blind when he was emotionally disturbed. When the mind was clouded, its clarity of perception was broken. Turbidity of emotions blocked it. And when he would become calm and quiet, he could once again see. And it's an operation of direct perception of mind, which is possible to our mind as it is, except by habit it has plugged in here. Equally, we discover that the same mind, if you take a little bit of trouble, can be taught to perceive now through other senses, such as the fingers, for example. And people undergo training to run their finger over text and even make out the words or distinguish colors. Because your skin is just as much sensitive to light, but in fact, the mind uses the physical support of organs and light only as a point of support. If its direct perception begins to kick in, the point of support is only secondary. As again is proved when you're watching television, and in the old days, if the signal was weak, the picture would become grainy. Sometimes it would be so grainy that you can barely make out. The sound would become so full of static and noise that you could barely hear. But if you concentrate, you can make out what the image is. And if you get used to it after a while, you've seen people watching TV in the old days and they don't know what it's like to see a clean signal, but they can enjoy a movie just as well because somehow the mind tunes into what is being represented and somehow integrates and goes beyond the little dots. A skill which computers have great difficulty to implement. All that a computer gets through the video camera is a pattern of dots. And if there are not sufficient dots to make out what is being seen, is almost impossible for a computer. But the human mind is able to do because something of the deeper sight kicks in and rides upon the physical perception. And it is this which happens also when we meet somebody through a video chat, through the mobile phone, and at some point the emotions connect. And if emotions can connect, well, why not something of the perception of sight also? Well, all of these are there as phenomena to show you that the actual character of perception is not dependent on our corporeal senses. All consciousness perceives consciousness finally. And the implication of this is we have corporeal senses, but we have also deeper inner senses. We have also higher senses. Wherever there is consciousness organized, there is a perception which can develop. And so, at every level, vertically, So if you're normally used to seeing through your more mental awareness, there is also an emotional perception. When you're sitting with somebody, you are connected emotionally. You can often feel what the other person is feeling. And you say, "Why are you sad today? How did you feel?" If you had to describe it, you'll say, "I could feel as if a heaviness in you." Now, see the vocabulary that we use. It's as if a vocabulary of sensation, of touch, of weight. Your heart feels heavy. Or today, your mind is light, or your heart is light. It's as if my heart is singing, you will say, or the sense of floating which comes, the lift that takes place. These are all vocabulary of physical senses that we use to describe that sensory emotional perception. Or you look at a person and say, "Today you look gray. Today you are full of brightness." And it's a vocabulary of sight. Or you say, "My heart is singing," it's a vocabulary of sound. Actually, every grade of consciousness has its own quality of perception, and every perception of consciousness meeting consciousness has 5 aspects. Again, you have to go into Sri Aurobindo's writings to fully appreciate why 5. And nobody so far has really explained this the way he does. He shows you how pure consciousness, when one indivisible, infinite pure consciousness translates itself or converts itself through a series of self modifications to become distinct, separate, rigid, multiple forms, it goes through 5 kinds of self modification or self limitation. And on each of these levels, therefore, you have a particular distinctness of perception or relation with consciousness. And therefore, all experience of consciousness meeting consciousness has a 5-fold quality, which makes for the 5 physical senses as organized in the body. But equally for the emotions touching emotions, there are 5-fold characteristics. Equally for mind meeting mind, there are 5-fold characteristics, or a higher perception similarly. So any level of consciousness will have its 5-fold perception in meeting consciousness. Equally, as you go deeper within, the inner ranges of consciousness have their own quality of perception, which can become 5-fold, and all the way down to the inmost psychic presence. And the psychic perception also can have this 5-fold quality. But each of these ranges, inner or higher, sees differently. The inner ranges within you perceives more deeply within the other. Each level or grade of consciousness perceives most naturally that grade which resonates with it. Remember, in our picture of reality, every level of consciousness is mixing with every other level. The analogy would be of all the radio waves of every frequency passing through us right now. What do you tune into? That's what you hear. So, in the physical gradation of consciousness, we touch physical matter because that's what the body substance is tuned to. In the emotional grade of consciousness, you meet the emotions of others because that's what emotions are tuned to. In your thought awareness, you naturally tune in and resonate with the thoughts of others. And at a deeper level, as you approach the psychic consciousness, you tune into the psychic vibration and presence in others. Or as you rise in gradations of consciousness, in the higher mind or the intuitive consciousness, you perceive things in that depth or greater totality which it corresponds to. So now, when we look at this phrase, when Sri Aurobindo says, we use normally only our corporeal senses. What other senses are there? All other senses. Everywhere there is consciousness within you is a sense perception. And so, broadly, for practical purposes, people speak of inner senses or higher senses to make a broad category. But in fact, inner senses covers a whole spectrum, and higher senses also can cover a whole spectrum. All of this we are normally unaware of. I won't say we are blind to, that would be an error. We are unaware of, or we only register by reflection in our more surface parts of consciousness. We gave the example earlier of how a person walks into the room, you are perhaps busy reading or working. Even before you have turned to look at the person, you have sensed their mood. This person is upset. You're not even conscious in your thought surface mind that the person is upset, but you sense it. Something has touched, something has impacted and already registered. We are conscious on a subliminal level, but it does not connect to our surface working consciousness. Afterwards, when the person comes to you and you have an interaction, you say, "You know what, I think I sensed it when you came in." But it didn't register on the surface part. And this just shows you that there are ranges within you where things are taking place, which may reflect or may not reflect, but they certainly have an influence on your surface parts. So, we use only our corporeal senses. That's the first thing which prevents us seeing the subtle worlds, the inner influences of others, as well as your own inner ranges. If you could become aware of these inner realms, you would be conscious of things within you, you would be conscious of things in others, you would be conscious of the inner realms of the collective human mind and the inner worlds of the vital or mental. The second thing, though, which prevents us from perceiving is that we live almost wholly in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. She's putting three things together. But the character of these three is they are physical. There is a mind which is pure mind, and then there is a mind which is embedded in the physical body. So deeply embedded that we cannot even distinguish it from the body. And the result is, it feels as if I am thinking in the brain and as a result of the brain process. That's how it feels like to us, isn't it? We are so convinced that I am thinking here. And now my brain is a little dull, so I'm unable to think very well. And this is the part of the mind which is so bound to the biology that if you play with the biology and tweak it, the state of mind changes. It is, in fact, this part of the mind which is normally released from the biological moorings when you feel you're high, either from drugs or even from an emotional high. What do you mean by high? It feels like I am not bounded to body, I am floating, I am somehow separate from the grounding influence of the physical body. And so it feels like, and the sense, the vocabulary we use of high, precisely because it is feels higher than, or free from, or floating out from the physical. And it is the same even with the life force. Our life energy is so tightly bound to the physical body, or rather, there is a free working of the life energy, and the part which is so tightly bound is the part where we live in. And it is this part which fluctuates according to your body state. So now I'm tired, I did not sleep enough, I don't have enough energy. I didn't eat food, I don't have enough energy. I eat food, and suddenly my energy has come back. Watch what happens when you run. You run, you reach a point where you're so tired it feels as if the body will collapse. But if you somehow sustain, suddenly there's a second breath, and you feel lifted up with a fresh breath of energy. And we call it second breath. At that point, they will say, your biology has started converting your fat into sugars. It's shifted process. But what's your experience? You experience freed from the body, freed from the dullness and heaviness and inertia of the body. Something similar happens when you're fasting. You struggle the first day, second day, but generally by the third day, suddenly you feel more energy than usual, and the quality of energy is lighter, freer, clearer. Your thoughts become clearer because the energy animating your mind is also more pure. and you stop feeling hungry. And it feels as if you could go on, except the biology at some point begins to break down, and it can at some point either pull the higher mind or vital, or your mind or vital can sustain itself on practically nothing of the biology. And we see that sometimes in unusual people where the medical science will say the body shouldn't be able to support itself, but the person continues. And at that time, the quality of energy is fundamentally different, free, more free at least. And all of this tells you that we have a mind and we have a vital which is free. But there is a part of the mind which leans into and is bound to the physical body. There's a part of the vital which is also similarly leaning into and bound in the physical body. And the physical body binding it now limits it, dulls it, shuts it down. Recall the description of the physical material level of worlds, of plane of consciousness, and its characteristic. And this is what it does to the energy and the mind awareness as it binds it. This is what we experience in the first emergence of life and mind in evolution. This materiality of life energy, of life itself, and of mind awareness. But this binding took place long ago in the evolution when, as the material evolution was struggling to reach out and express life which was hidden inside it, there was the life impulse of the free life energy which leaned down to assist in its emergence, and a continuum was formed. But the part of the biological experience with which life has emerged is not directly aware of this higher range, but the higher range is continuously pouring into it and influencing it. And something of this reaches out to draw from it whenever it is in distress. In fact, when in especial danger, suddenly something of the instinct within reaches out to draw. Let's say you're dead tired. You're so sleepy. You've not eaten food. You have no energy left. And suddenly a tiger pops up in the middle of the forest. What happens? There's a burst of energy, and you're able to run as never before. But at that moment, you're as if drawing vitality from the higher ranges. So, what it shows you is that there is a connection, but we are not normally used to drawing from there. We are used by habit to draw from below. Now, it used to be an experience for a long time for me that I would see people say, we ate food, now I feel full of energy. And I had the opposite experience. The moment I ate food, I would feel the dulling of energy. And I never understood how people could feel it the other way until somebody observed, and it was someone in the ashram. He said, that's because you are used to drawing more from above and the food dulls. And that was the key, and I understood what it was. And you will see, perhaps all of us have had this experience. After eating certain types of food, you feel more tired. Other types of food make you feel a lift of energy. But if you're conscious and if you're careful to draw from the environment, then you can draw energy and be full of energy. And then the relationship with physical food has the effect of relatively of dulling. And it's something you can switch from this to that. The only thing preventing you is a habit. Some people seem to do it spontaneously by an instinctive habit to draw from the environment, and the result is they have always lots of energy, even though they seem to eat very little. And often, these are the people who seem to eat the least who have more energy. And it may seem as if because they eat less that they have energy, it's the reverse. Because they have energy, they need to eat much less. And it is the same with the mind. The powers of the mind, as long as you're used to relying on the biological support, the powers of the mind have been dulled. But if you tuned your awareness as if to turn up, to open out to the wider, freer mental realm of awareness, you draw clarity from there and have access to higher creativity and freer thought process, not bound to brain. If you recall Sri Aurobindo's description of how one of the training exercises he recommends for developing intuition is to shift above head. And he explains the first thing which you have as a result is you get free from brain fatigue. Now, brain fatigue is something we all experience. You're thinking hard, you're struggling, and after a while, you feel tiredness in the substance of your mind, brain, or rather, the part of mind tied to brain. That's brain fatigue. People repeat as they are preparing for exams, they learn things by heart, they struggle until they are tired. Where in the thinking part, you shift the center higher up, immediately your mind becomes clear, free, and you never experience tiredness of mind. Your body is tired, but your mind can as if lift up and be completely clear. And these are things which should have been taught to us. They should be part of our educational system because it's so easy. Anybody can do it with a little bit of training. And to settle into this poise above may take a few days of training, not much more. But the benefits are so immense. So, the second benefit, you're free from brain fatigue as a first benefit. The second benefit is that your mind becomes clearer, freer, wider. Your creativity is much greater. And again, people who are used to doing this instinctively have that higher access. And those who have not done it, either instinctively or have been taught or by habit been bound in the brain, their working of intelligence is as if more dull. And you may say, so and so is not very intelligent. Not true. So and so is by habit bound in the brain mind layer, physical mind layer. And if the person can be trained now to disengage, shift higher up, you'll find their IQ will jump at least 10 points within days, weeks, let's say. And if that further opens out to higher intuition, it'll jump another 10 points. Intelligence, as we call it, is not a product of the brain. Rather, the brain is a dulling factor to our intelligence, at least as we are today as a humanity in our evolution. There would have been a phase where the mind was still emerging and didn't have the capacity to come into its own free of the brain. And at that point, we would have said the mental body is not fully formed and organized. But in today's human evolution, that's no more the case. The mental body is formed, reasonably organized, that you're able to separate from the brain. But we are not doing it by habit, by bad training, or simply contamination of our environment. A child that grows up in an environment where higher thinking is discouraged would tend by habit of the environment stay dull, but the moment he gets a chance, the mind will want to leap out and access its higher possibilities. But well, it's not been trained, so it's been limited by lack of that. So this is what he is referring to, three things. We live in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. The result of this is our energy feels as if emerging from body rather than from outside, from our vital body, of which we are practically not conscious. Similarly, our thoughts feel as if emerging from our emotions and brain functions rather than the free working in the mental body. Now, you see, all you need to do to become conscious of things of the higher, freer vitality and mind is shift this focus from the vital, which is bound in the body, shift to become aware of the vitality which is free of the body. And you already have it because you have a vital body, free from the physical. Similarly, shift from the mind which is embedded in the body to become conscious of the part of mind which is free from the body. That's it. Just that shift will begin the process. You will begin to become more conscious of your mental body and of your vital body. And bit by bit, as a result, you'll begin to live more and more in it because it feels so much more free, so much more clear, light, plastic. And the same for the vitality. The first turn is your key. Once you can make that, the rest is a process which will pursue, which will follow by maintaining your interest or awareness to become more conscious. But in the absence of that, you see people who are deeply physically grounded and so identified with the body that nothing else exists. All is body and product of body. For that person, anything coming in the mental or vital body will not register, or at best will register indirectly through some internal process. So, this is our second problem, that normally we live almost wholly in the body and the physical vitality and the physical mind. And it is not directly through these that the life world enters into relations with us. Again, we pause. Why does he say directly? He could have said it is not through these. It's not directly through these, because even through these the life world does influence. Because life energy in the body is connected to the vital body. Mind in the body is connected to the mind body, and through the mind body to the mental world. So things do happen, they do get into the life mind inside body and pop up, but it's an indirect connection. It's like our indirection of sight. When you have a webcam chat with somebody on the other side of the world, your internet is your connecting medium. The quality of the screen is your medium, and then it goes through the site. The more layers you add in between, the less likely the reproduction is faithful. And so when things pop in from the vital or mental of the universal, they enter through your vital or mental body and then creep into this part of the vital or mental which is in the biology embedded, and then pop up. By that time, it has got so warped, so fragmented, that it comes up as one more suggestion. How valuable is it? You cannot say. You cannot make out. It has already acquired the quality of your energy, your emotions, your desires. So it feels like, I want to do this, when in fact it was a suggestion from outside. Even when people reach out to feel subtly from outside, they cannot distinguish what comes from outside or what comes from inside. Because in the very act of receiving in your vital body or your mental body, you have given to it substantiality of your mind and your vital. And so it has a character of or an imprint of your personality. And so when it pops up, you say, it's my thought, my feeling. And because you think it's yours, you attach yourself to it and don't want to let it go. And if someone told you, actually, it was not your thought, it was my suggestion, you'll say, oh, why should I take your suggestion? It's a strange thing. If only we knew how much is not ours. I remember once I was with a friend, businessman friend, and as many businessmen, he was seeking some sense of stability, certainty in his life, which is full of uncertainties, and he resorted to astrology. It feels like it's mathematical, so it should be stable. And he would study himself, and he'd gone quite deep into it. And he was always consulting people and astrologers. And one day he told me he's found one astrologer. This is the best ever. He can tell you things to the precision of the day. I said, okay, having studied astrology, I knew it doesn't work like that. At best, it indicates trends, and that's about it. The rest is your intuition, which may catch glimpses beyond. So, when I had occasion, I was meeting him, he brought his friend. And so I was looking at the friend, I was seeing what he was doing, and it was something so weird. He would take the chart, and out of the chart, he would extract some other chart, and out of that, he would go through something so complicated that at some point, your intellect broke down. And that's when his intuition would kick in and he would say, this. So I said, okay. Often astrologers, when you go to them, the intuition kicks in not to describe what is perceived as a tendency in the circumstances, but they pick up what is in your mind or heart as a fear or a plan. And they just reflect what you already know. So I was curious to see, is he picking up from intuition something deeper, or was he only reflecting what people came to? And as I was thinking about it, my friend told him, okay, and it's a standard, easy test for an astrologer. Looking at this person, can you describe what is the ascendant sign? Now, the ascendant sign has a strong influence on the body shape and form. So, certain types of bodies, you can straight away say it's either this sign or that. In my case, a tall body, it has to be one of two signs. So, the rest was only a question of guess or intuition. So, just as he asked this question, and this astrologer now looks at me and gets into his state, I say, okay, let me check him out also. And I hold in my mind or dangle in front of his head the number 6. Now, if he's thinking, if he's using his intuition, the intellect will cut through because it can't be 6, it has to be something else. It would cut through and go to what is true. If he's only mind reading, then he will catch this. And as expected, he said 6. And my friend was very upset because it's a failure of a very low order. Any astrologer worth his name would have cut through that. So he says, no, no, it can't be. Don't be silly. Try it again. And again, this fellow goes into his state. Again, I dangle 6. Now, at this point, any intelligent person, the intelligence would say, I just made a mistake. I can't repeat it. He doesn't even apply his intelligence. Again, he feels, he catches 6. You see how ridiculous it was. He was not using his intelligence. Even after the first error, he couldn't cut through. And my friend was so disappointed because it was his demonstration of capability. And I had to apologize. And I said, no, I was dangling the 6. But it just shows you how unconscious we are of what we pick from the environment. We may be sitting next to somebody in the bus or the train, and his thoughts hop into us, or his emotional state infects us. We get up and we go into a workspace, suddenly we find ourselves angry or depressed or whatever, and we let it out on someone else. Have you ever experienced this? Somebody is very angry, they come to you, there's an outburst, they go away relieved. Now they're free of the anger. And then you find yourself seething. How dare he do this? How dare he do this? And it's seething, and you can't burst it out on your colleagues. You go home and burst it on your loved ones who will take it. And after you have expelled it from you, you feel relief. And then you notice they are infected with that upset energy. If you are actually conscious, you will see one person throwing it upon another, who throws it upon another, who throws it upon another. And there's a chain often that passes through. And you, knowing that, you might still find yourself helpless. I've had that happen. I saw somebody coming. I knew she was aiming for a big conflict. Unfortunately, I was in a fever, protection week, and I caught it. And I was holding myself back. I was restraining from a lot of provocative statements. I couldn't contain myself. At some point, I burst in a reaction to a provocative statement. I regretted it, but that was enough to free me from the pressure, but that was enough for them also to use it against me later. I had lost the game. The person had come with intention to provoke and had successfully completed. But knowing it even, and this just is to make you conscious of how complex this domain and how little we are aware, how little mastery we have, especially in the vital emotional range. In thought, maybe a little more because more conscious. But this is all to say that even if we turn to become conscious of our vital mental ranges, we grow into them, there is still a lot that will come through because it belongs to that subliminal deeper ranges of which we are not conscious. So your first awakening to your mind awareness, mind body vital is only a superficial part of ranges deeper, which open out eventually to the whole vital world and the mental world. And Sri Aurobindo refers to this range intervening as the circumconscient, surrounding consciousness of your individuality. So if you had to picture it, normally we picture levels like this: physical body, vital body, mental body piled up or joined upon each other. Or sometimes people will say, around your physical is the vital, around that is the mental. Nah, that's not. It's a way nice picturing on a two-dimensional paper to suggest. But the reality is, if this is your physical body, let's visualize a ball, but of foam. The vital body you can conceive of like water in a ball around it, completely soaking through the foam, and then fading out, becoming thinner and thinner to quite a distance. So you have the dense vitality, and then, like a fluid, it thins out. And it thins out where? It literally extends into the vital world, infinitely into the universe. Somewhere around there is a boundary which is pretty much where you feel your individuality ends. But it's almost arbitrary, it fluctuates. When you are much more tightly closed, protective, the boundary shrinks. When we are much more open in your emotions and energies, the boundary expands. Often, when you're sitting in a very crowded space, if you're sensitive, you tend to shrink your boundary. You're in an airplane, a long flight, 9 or 10 hours, maybe more. You can shrink so much if you're sensitive, or you get infected so deeply you fall sick, or various things happen. It takes 2 days to expel things. But if you shrink enough, it takes 2 days for you to disentangle from that shrinking. And it's interesting to see sometimes children growing up in an environment where they are too sensitive for an environment too coarse, and their personality is as if compressed. And freed from the environment, it takes a while to decompress and expand in engaging with a freer, safer space of life. But all this is to show that actual vital body is something very different. It's not neat, clean boundaries. So, this whole extension, we are conscious only of the part of the vital which is inside your little physical ball. That's the vitality you feel in the body. And even of that, the most dense part. There's a finer grade in the body which you don't feel, but in fact has great significance for your physical health. And then it becomes of a density which is almost physical and bordering that, which you call ectoplasmic, and then finer gradations, and then it extends beyond. And the same with the mental. Now have a picture of something still finer, like a gas, filling all three. It fills the physical, it fills the vital, and then extends further and of a different grade. And between these three grades, finer gradations. That's your model. Now, in this model, you see only continuum. You don't see distinctions, not even across layers. Everything interpenetrates everything else. Everything extends into everything else. Except we have instinctively a sense of boundary and a limit, which we call my space, my ideas, my feelings, etc. The conscious part of it is largely in the body identification, and some of it, sometimes more. And that's about it. All the rest, extending into the universe, is as if you're circumconscient. Your circumconscient also is plastic enough that it can extend in strange ways. So, a person, for example, has strong emotional attachments, let's say to a parent, to a child, to a relative, so strong that you even feel what the other person feels at a distance. Often it is seen in the vital body like a cord extending out. So you look at the vital body, you may see as if things sticking out, which represent those special bindings. And if those are broken or cut, it's literally like a physical wound and it takes time to heal. And this is just to give you a glimpse of how things are once we go beyond the physical vitality, physical mind, and the life world enters through those things, not through physical vitality and physical mind. So, it is not through these directly that the life world enters into relations with us. That is done through other sheaths of our being. So they are termed in the Upanishads other bodies, as they are called in a later terminology. The Upanishadic vocabulary is kosha. Kosha is literally sheath. And they're seen as sheaths because to the Upanishad, the value is first of the soul and the self, which takes on these almost like a coating, like a layer, like a clothing, as the Bhagavad Gita describes. The body is taken on and shed as a clothing. That which is real is the core, and in relation to it, these are almost clothings. So the vocabulary of Upanishad is kosha. The later vocabulary, later terminology, you will find also, particularly in recent times, they speak of aura and subtle body, and they speak of the etheric body and the mental body and causal body. Well, that's just a different way of looking at it, depending on how you prioritize. When you set aside the soul, then the body is much more important. And then Sri Aurobindo elaborates on this. The mental sheath or subtle body in which our true mental being lives, and the life sheath or vital body, which is more closely connected with the physical or food sheath, and forms with it the gross body of our complex existence. So now we have a vocabulary which so far Sri Aurobindo has not dealt with in this way. And it's not necessary to deal with it in this way for the yogic purpose until one comes to this question of becoming aware on those planes of consciousness. So, first, mental sheath or subtle body in which our true mental being lives, as distinct from our false mental being, which is this part of the mind which is embedded in the body. I am conscious, I am thinking. That's not the true mental being. Because, in fact, when it is thinking, it is going through a very narrow mechanical process, not realizing that the thought which it is thinking has already formed itself, and your mechanical process is only following the imprint of the thought. Think about that. It's as if something already sits like a magnetic field, and then the iron filings, pieces of metal, start falling into place. And if you say the pieces of metal falling into place create the field, that would be the illusion. The field is what makes the pieces fall into place. Why do I think like this? Because the thought is already dawning on me, or there is already a certain alignment of thought in the true mental being, or a suggestion from outside in the true mental being. And then this thought process follows. So we realize that what we have so far cherished as our mental awareness is not only not a true independent existing awareness, but also it is extremely unstable and mixed. It is largely influenced by your emotions, your preferences, your rigidities of the substance of your mind and biology and emotions. I'm using this word deliberately because, in fact, the experience is that the mental body has a substantiality of the quality of mind substance. In the yoga tradition, it is called the chitta, substance of mind. Similarly, the vital body has its own substantiality of the character of life, substance, energy, and the physical body having its substance. These two substances embedded in the physical acquire its dullness and darkness and heaviness. So, mental substance entering the physical body immediately gets dulled and sticky, acquiring the character of the physical brain substance. And the result is your thoughts move sluggishly, or there are certain forms of thought, grooves in which your thoughts go. I'll give you an example of a groove. The habit to think only in terms of your interest. is one of the grooves which is universal to all of us. The moment you look at something, the moment a situation occurs, automatically your thought goes into how does it affect me? It's a groove which is almost evolutionary because that's how it was for survival of the animals. But it's a groove we inherit from that evolution. But you can easily overcome this groove also. Start looking at things from a different way. And it's an exercise you can do. Instead of thinking from inside out, which is I inside looking at this, which automatically puts you as the center of the universe, you look at the same thing from third person perspective. How would someone else watching this perceive? And it's easy to do in the mind because the mind is much more elastic. And then you see, well, the whole thing has a very different value. With a little bit of skill, and this should be possible for all of us, a little bit of effort, to look at it not only third person viewpoint, but still higher, how does the universe view this? And then it becomes very interesting. Universe, automatically your mind goes as if from above, impersonally, not bound to your interest, not bound to the other person's interests, maybe even looking at a collective interest, but perhaps even beyond collective interest. So somebody has some difficulty, they may or may not ask for help. If you feel particularly generous, you might help by habit. It's also a generosity can be a habit, and often it can have a strong personal component. I am generous, so I should be, and you feel good about it. Strong ego center still. But if you look at a third person viewpoint, oh yes, I have excess of this, the person has less of it. Why not give? But the third person viewpoint might still think in human terms. If I give, what do I get in return? Or there should be a balance and so on. But from a universe point of view, which is inherently implied is the sense of infinity, there's plenty everywhere. Here is excess, here is little. Of course, it should go. Should anything come back? No need. It's fine as it is. And this changes completely your values, your priorities. You begin to look at things from a more universal perspective. And sometimes you know you have to do something. You may gain nothing from it, but it has to be done. It's done, and that's it. Even the other person may not have a significant need for it to be done by you to receive help from you, but you know it needs to be done. You do it, you walk on, and it's over. And there's a deep freedom from the narrow ego sense and a deep impersonality which can grow from it, which allows much deeper, meaningful relationships and values and so on. And it's an interesting exercise to develop from the perspective of the mind. But when the mind begins to have this quality, it permeates. Remember, all three are substances mixed into each other. The mind becoming more clear, more free, will then influence the vital substance, lift it into its clarity, or bring its light and clarity into it, which then will bring clarity into the physical. One could go the reverse way. Finally, everything is substance influencing substance. If the physical dullness is what makes the mind and vital dull, what if I make the physical material more light and clear? So let me eat cleaner food, lighter food, less dulling, associate myself with activities which bring greater purification of my physical consciousness, regular exercise which expels stagnant energies, and so on. Doing asanas which makes the body more conscious, more aware, etc. The result is automatically there's a lift felt in the quality of energies and in mind and thought. So you can go both ways because all three are interdependent. But what's interesting is the power of mind to influence the physical is far greater because it is more free and plastic. Whereas change from below takes longer, but it is more lasting. So you do asanas for 1 year, your manner of thought will change, and sometimes radically. I don't remember if I've mentioned this here, because I've repeated this a few times recently, but I'll repeat it here as an example. This was somebody who was working in the United States. I think it was in Baltimore or one of those areas where there are very strong tensions, racial tensions. And he is from a Afro American community. He was telling us literally there are blocks which are black and blocks which are white, and you can't cross over. Or if you go into the other side, you feel that you're not welcome. Or white policemen looking at you, you know that they start by doubting you. Are you a criminal about to commit a crime? So, some pretty weird stuff. And within that, there is a lot of violence and even gun violence in that community, particularly in that part of the African American community. And he was working with them to free young people from those things and from free them from living in fear and all the vicious cycle. So he said, being in that space, there was gang wars all the time. I had to carry a gun, and even when he spoke, you could feel the anger and tension and all the emotional disturbances. A year later, we happened to meet in a similar conference, and it was a completely different person, except his name was the same, he looked the same, but the face also had changed a little. There was none of that agitation and tension in him. And he said to us, my whole approach to my work has changed. I feel such deep confidence in myself that I don't carry a gun anymore. I can walk into a situation of conflict and I know that I have the capacity to master the situation, and I have done it so many times. And there was such great clarity in his articulation, expression, calm of his emotions. And everyone asked, well, what happened? What has made for this magical change? And he said, I started practicing yoga. I went for health reasons, but bit by bit, I found suddenly my body was more clear, my emotions were more stable, my thoughts were more clear, more optimistic. And bit by bit, it changed me completely. And the confidence that I have developed, I don't need the gun anymore. What did that yoga mean for him? Asanas and maybe breathing exercises, pranayam. But it was enough to clarify, purify the physical consciousness to a degree that the true nature of his vital and mental being now could come forward and come through. You see, from the very nature of his work, you could see the vital had this heroic service orientation. In the mind, there was a great commitment to for high truths and idealism. But it was mixed and clouded by the dullness of the physicality mixing into these parts of his mental and vital body. Just that screen removed, dramatic change. Now, you may not have the same dramatic change for everybody. Because his mind and vital were already of a very highly developed kind, that's why he was doing that work. It immediately allowed it to come through. In 1 year, there was this dramatic change. But in any case, it will have this ripple effect all the way through. In this case, it had the effect of much more allowing things to come through from the transparency. So, actually, we have to start thinking of these things in terms of substantiality, but it's not physical substance. It's of a different grade altogether, where space and time and the experience of space and time itself change. So, all this is to say that the idea that they are bodies is valid, because we can be conscious in them. They have an independent existence of their own, they have a character of their own, which then blends or imprints on the physical character of the physical body. And if the physical is dull, it brings everything else into dullness. If the physical can be clarified, it offers a base of support for everything else. But I drifted into this to highlight how the mind body, being much more conscious and much more free and wide, can bring a higher freedom into the vital and physical, and so rapidly change and purify these. But it may not last. On the other hand, when from the physical side there is the purification that takes place, it seeps up and supports everything else, but it lasts. Because the physical has this inertia, this resilience, that resistance to change. It works both ways. It resists change from dullness to clarity, but equally it resists change from clarity to dullness. So you can see how it becomes for us as if like an anchor, stable base on which the things developed on higher levels can be anchored and make them immune from the otherwise complex mix of influences which come from everywhere. So, my reason in highlighting this is to put back importance on the role of the physical body. Until now, we saw it more as a limiting influence. But equally, when awakened, made more conscious, or even spiritualized to whatever extent, it can become such a solid anchor for the whole build up of the higher ranges of the whole being. And that's why, in the way the physical domain to the cosmic Purusha is described as the footing. Earth is his footing. Earth is the foundation on which the whole pile of levels of consciousness rest. And we come back to the importance that the mother gives to the physical body for the spiritual purpose, to make it more conscious and even to awaken in its consciousness a higher aspiration, would make everything else on all other levels aligned to that aspiration and the work that much easier. So while it has the character of dulling because the past is the inheritance of dulling, equally when you make it clear, it becomes for you the basis for a future and a strong basis and fortress, as we have seen in earlier discussions. If there is an attack in the mental or vital world, the body coming back and binding itself into the physical is your defense precisely because of its dullness or inertia. So, the influence from the life worlds enters in relation with us through other sheets of our being, other bodies, and then he mentions first mental sheath or subtle body, which is our true, in which our true mental being lives. So, all this was elaboration from there. Where is your true mind then? In this freer poise, in the mental body. And there is where you see the true development of your mind in its current evolution. Remember, if this conscious developed mind is dulled in identification with the physical body, you see its only dulled response. That's not your true mental evolution. You clarify the physical body through asanas, pranayam, or other diet change, lifestyle change, purification of thought and emotions and values, the basic yama and niyama of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and the true character of your mind now can express, and you discover what you're truly capable of. That's when you come into your own as a true mental being in your current evolution. And then you can begin your true evolution subsequently. Otherwise, you're just struggling with a dullness which is artificially imposed, and you don't even know what you're capable of. And the same with the vital. So, the true mind, true mental being lives in the subtle body. It is in this that one slips when in daydream. So, you're sitting and your mind drifts off. You remember a situation, or you imagine yourself in a beautiful garden. And in your mind's eye, you can make the garden as beautiful as you can, utopian, magically beautiful. And visualize that. And then put your mind into that. And you wander around it. You can wander around it walking. You don't need to. You can float. You can fly. You can expand yourself to embrace and fill the whole garden. You can rise above it and embrace it from all around. You can enter inside the flower and experience the flower. And all of this is taking place in your true mental consciousness. and is an experience in the mental consciousness which corresponds to the kind of experience of that grade in the mental world. And if at that point you completely separated from the physical body, you would actually be floating as if wandering in the mental world of that grade and of that creation, experiencing it vividly in the mental substance. And suddenly at that point, someone shouts and wakes you from your daydream. You come back and it fades like a dream. I was daydreaming, and you are told it is unreal to be discarded. In fact, you were living in a plane or a grade of mental consciousness, and if you're creating images, you're creating a reality which is of that domain. And from that domain can influence the physical domain, if such is the link that is made. So, when taking up a project, you're often daydreaming, visualizing what it will be like. You can, of course, wander into a fantasy of the project, not of useful, not of much value, or you can visually create the space. You're creating an environment, visually create the space, visualize, perceive within your mind's eye all the details as an architect has to do, or even an engineer has then to perceive to translate in physical terms. And you can even imprint certain qualities of consciousness into that space, not just as an idea in the head, but into the physical space of that region. You stand there where the building is going to be constructed, visualize the rooms and spaces, and even imprint certain intentions. And you're assisting that whole process to take place because it's one of the influences now you've released for it to actualize. You will remember when mother was still in the initial stages of the Orville's emergence. The project had just been launched, and she had not yet spoken of the Matrimandir. Somebody at that time had a dream in which he saw the form of the Matrimandir. And when it was mentioned to the mother, she said, yes, he has seen that which is still to come. In her creative consciousness, already forms had been built. They're still fluid because that's the nature of the mental substance. In her case, it was coming from a supramental imprint, which was then reflecting in the mental world. And there's already this creation which is made. And the fact that it is made, and especially of a grade which is supramental, ensures its physical success. Because in the supramental consciousness, there is the automatic effectuation, which nothing can resist. Of course, in the translation from there through the other gradations, it may take time, there may be variations of form, but it is inevitable. And the fact that she had already initiated that had its ripple effect on other levels, and someone conscious on that level could already glimpse it. And that shows you the importance of those levels on our material life. The same can be said of illnesses within us. Knots in our thought become knots of our energy, which become knots of our physical body. If you have repeated instincts of fear, the tightening that takes place in the stomach, which comes with fear, leads to tightening of the energies, which leads to tightening of biological processes which are in the influence of those energies, which leads to the disruption or even not at a biological level. The kind of knot of thought reflects in the kind of knot of energy, which reflects in the kind of knot in the material. A cyst or rigidity of tissue are different kinds of knots, and they represent the qualitative difference on the higher levels. So, literally, looking at the symptoms of an illness, you can describe what are the likely energetic and psychological roots which lead to it. So, the mental sheath or subtle body in which our true mental being lives, is that grade where we have the free and full influence and play of our mind awareness, as you experienced in the daydream. It need not be daydream, it can also be night dream. In the night state, your mental body can separate and literally see itself or represent to itself the sense of a body. Of course, it's not bound, it's not so rigid, so it's plastic. It can feel more like a ball of awareness or even like a point of awareness, and it can float. But if it wants to see itself, it can represent to itself a form of body, but it will be fluid. It can freely float, fly. And depending on the grade of substance where it enters, it can be perceiving things of the mental world, or it can even densify its perception, its senses. Remember, it's consciousness meeting consciousness, mind being more free and directly seeing, can perceive things of the vital world or even of the physical world. So, one of the forms in which people have this experience is you find yourself floating out of the body, you see your body still lying on the bed, and then you float right through the wall or through the ceiling because they don't have substantiality of the mental type. But it leads you a suggestion. If somebody put a mental wall, could you go through it? It's an interesting idea. And yes, there can be things like this, but one can also pass through it because the mental wall is of a certain quality of consciousness. And if you tune yourself into a different quality, you can bypass it also. Or create a field of mind in which certain kinds of mental energies cannot come in. It's not so much a wall, but more like a field. Or a field in which negative thoughts are repelled spontaneously. So negative mind qualities cannot come in and things like that. So, literally, a substantiality and laws and rules of working of mental domain, mental substance, which are experienced now in the mental body. So, this is the first that he is speaking of. The mental sheath or subtle body in which our true mental being lives. And this is why the true mind experience can be very different from the physical mind experience. I think I mentioned this. A person who has a damaged biology, let's say a damaged nervous system, or there was a stroke, and as a result, some part of the brain is damaged, the person is unable to speak. So the doctor will say his speech faculty is damaged. No, because the person steps out of the body, in the mental body, he can speak freely. He comes back into the physical body, he is unable to speak. The speech faculty is intact. The machinery of brain which translates speech faculty into biological control is damaged, and so is unable to articulate or unable to convert to the grade of physical mind where the more dense thought formation is there. So for example, I remember something, I know what I want to say, but the word in that language I have forgotten. That's close to the physical mind and close to the brain. That's where you have a slip, a gap, or unable to translate into any impulse that can become a physical process. And interestingly, the part that's damaged is the link from mind to speech. But we have another link to speech, which is not mental but emotional, which is often expressed when you sing from your heart. Not remembering a poem, but feeling and singing from the heart. And so, what is very interesting is people in whom there has been a damage to the speech center cannot speak, but they can sing very often. And that passage is used as a way of therapy to get back and recover the part which is able to connect to mind. So, when you begin to look at things from the perspective of other bodies, mental and vital bodies, you not only understand how this works, but you can actually design therapies. You can assist in creating new means not only for training but for developing yourself and for manifesting higher possibilities. So, mental sheath or subtle body in which our true mental being lives, of which we are not normally fully aware and we are not able to fully express, and the life sheath or vital body. Pranamaya kosha is the term, manomaya kosha for the mind mental sheath. So, life sheath, pranamaya kosha, or vital body is the term Sri Aurobindo uses for this, which is more closely connected with the physical or food sheath. So, again, he is using the vocabulary of yoga. The physical body in the yoga is annamaya kosha. Food, literally, annamaya. Anna is food, annamaya of the nature of food. In the yoga tradition, the words have deep psychological and even philosophical significance. And so the body, physical body, is called annamaya, of the nature of food, because that's the characteristic of the material domain compared to other worlds. If you look at the vital world, mental world, and we have seen already the characteristic of the vital, in the vital world, things are permanent. Life is immortal. Life never dies. It can change form, but it never dies. There's always a continuity. In the physical world, though, strangely, you notice, life to survive has to eat other life. So, plant has to eat soil or water. Animal has to eat plant or other animal. But itself, in the act of eating, is being eaten by other creatures, at the very least, microbes or parasites or eventually other animals. And this is one of the great recognitions of science coming now from a more physical approach. It speaks of the food chain or the life cycle, where everything feeds upon everything else in order to sustain what? The life cycle, which is immortal, interestingly. Life is still immortal, but the form of life and matter has to die in order to become immortal. Strange. And the method of immortality is to eat, for which one part has to die so that the other can live, which then has to die so that something else can live, which makes for the immortality. So the immortality is as if concealed in this chain of eating food. The snake starts eating its own tail. What happens now? It digests its tail, which then goes through the digestion process and grows back material, which becomes its body, which then again is eaten by the snake's mouth, which is digested and grows back. You see the interesting idea here. So there is this symbol which is used in many esoteric traditions of the snake eating its own tail. That's the nature of this life force bound in matter. Why? Because matter has rigid form. And when life has to grow beyond a point, the form doesn't allow it. For which purpose life has to break out of form. And form breaking is death. Or on the other side, the form rigidified becomes now in its very rigidity a limitation, which then is eaten by a higher life form, which uses it to build its plasticity, and so on. But the end result is the rigidity of matter is the root cause of this problem. You can conceive of a time when matter evolves sufficiently that it is no more so rigid, it becomes more plastic, more conscious, then the form will not have this need to die in order to live. And then you could perhaps represent the divine immortality of the divine consciousness even in physical form, but that's still a little away. But you can see how, in the logic, it's obvious it has to happen at some point. So, the physical domain is called food, annamaya or annamaya kosha, food sheath, because of this characteristic which is so distinctive. No other plane of reality has this characteristic. So always a name is given to that which makes most distinct this thing. You see, if you had two different flowers, They look similar. How would you name them? You will look for the quality which makes this different from that. And that's how you name it. And if you have to differentiate from all other flowers, you will look for the unique quality of this. And so it becomes its name. And that's the name Annamaya Kosha. And so he says of this life sheath or vital body, which is more closely connected with the physical or food sheath, and forms with it the gross body of our complex existence. Now, this is the part which is important for us to recognize. This vital body is more closely connected to the physical. Doesn't mean it's only connected to the physical. Yes, so you have to catch the nuance. It is also connected to the mental. It is the same vitality of the vital body which supports mind and physical body. And that's the link between the two. And that's how mind influences physical body through the link of the vital. But now, where's the nerve center? Where's the control point? Not mind, vital. Vital controls mind, vital controls physical. That's your center. And that's why Sri Aurobindo points out how the knot of the ego is in the vital. The ego has a mental component, it has a physical component. Both of these can be played around with quite easily. But the knot which is sticky, which doesn't let go, is in the vital. The instinctive shrinking of life force to protect itself. It makes the body shrink, it makes the mind shrink, and so on. So the vital is the fulcrum. Around the vital, the whole drama of your personality revolves because it's the animating principle. It animates mind, it animates physical body. If you can change the quality of the animating energy, your mind will become clearer, your physical motives and instincts will become clearer. When this energy becomes more coarse or more dull or is open to crude influences, you'll find crude instincts rising in your body. Where did this emotion come from? I didn't have it. It's not natural to me. It came through the vital. Where did this weird thought come from? I'm not used to thinking like this. Well, it popped in through the vital. So the role of the vital here is extremely important. What we experience as emotions is the part of the vital that mixes with the mind. And so it has a greater connection to the mind awareness, but it's actually led from the vital. But it's not the pure vital energy. It's the form of vital energy when it mixes with mind. In the same way, when the vitality enters the physical body, the rush of energy that you feel is the form of the vital energy in the physical body, but it's not the vital purely. The pure vital has a certain freedom and a capacity to open out to the universe. And it is by training yourself to access this grade that you're able to draw enormous amounts of energy and continue your work. And one can do very simple exercises. And one of the simplest exercises which you could do is simply breathe slow and deep first, because your physical breathing is a reflection of your vital inflow and outflow. But after a point, you shift your attention from your physical breathing to the energy, breathing in and out from all directions. So you breathe in as if the energy and breathe out. And then after a point, you notice you don't need to breathe out. You can just breathe in and relax or draw in more. Or if you need to breathe out, it's more as if you're expelling stale energy to draw in fresh energy. And there's a point where you begin to feel distinctly this inflow. And that's when you've got the hang of it and you can just draw. But a simple exercise done with a visualization of this kind is enough in 2 minutes to already give you a certain boost of vitality. If you overdo it, then your physical body can't contain. It gets a little unsteady. It is unable to sleep because there's too much energy and it has other problems. Or you burst out the energy in anger. You're unable to control your anger and things like that. So your body has developed a certain relationship with the vital energy entering it, and there's a balance of working. And it is this balance which is characterized by the five vayus, pancha vayu, the five pranic flows in the physical body. These are the five modes of working of the vital body flow, energy flows as it plugs into the physical. Left to itself in the vital body, the energy flow is much more free. It has its own distinct tendencies, but it's much more free. When it binds itself into form, it takes on distinctive forms. And five corresponding to five senses, there's a reason for that. It corresponds to those five grades of any free consciousness reducing itself to grade of form and distinction has to go through five self limitations. So, just a quick summary. The first operation, and principally the most important, is the operation called prana. And a pranayam comes from there. It's the drawing in of life force into the body. And its chief physical formation is the breath. So it feels as if you stop breathing, then you start suffocating or you lose energy. But you can notice that since this is the form of it, you can also breathe through other means, through other directions, and so on. Even the skin breathes, in fact. It draws in oxygen. If you paint your skin with a coating that prevents air from being absorbed, you actually suffocate. People die from that if the skin is completely covered up. If you release the skin or wear clothes which are reasonably loose that air can flow, your body actually is able to be better nourished energetically. So, in fact, the physical skin breathing is also a representation of the energy drawn from all directions. That's the prana aspect. And then there is the apana, which is the throwing out movement, which is organized in the physical biology by the excretory and downward push, where what you have taken in physically has gone through a process of digestion to absorb what is relevant and what is not relevant to eject. But this whole movement of expelling is one of the operations of life force. And equally, it does it around you, it does it through other means. When you cry, the expelling of tears is also an expelling of a certain energy. So after crying, you feel relieved. Many people feel relieved. Why? Because you expelled a certain energy. Speech often takes that form. You burst out in anger, and then that bundle is thrown out. What did you do? You threw energy out. It's expelling. So you're taking an energy, and the pushing out of energy is the second relationship of the individual form to the universal energy. In the totality of the universal, which is infinite, neither of these exist. Think about it. There's no taking in, there's no giving out. It only flows. It's only when you carve out a finite piece out of the infinite that there's an in and out movement. Okay? So prana, apana. And then between the two, there is a balancing which is called samana. The word literally means equalizing. It is the energy which holds the state of balance between how much you take in and how much you expel. How much of what you take in goes back into how much you expel, but also the balance between the two. Now, you'll notice during sleep, there's a shift of balance where the process preparing for expulsion is stronger. So, you wake up in the morning with the body ready to throw out physically, but already energetically that turn has taken place. On a higher level, you're drawing in energy to nourish the body for rest. So the balance of where you draw, how much you throw out, that changes. When you're at rest, the quantum of taking in and throwing out, the balance is held. When you're in activity, you start running, the quantum of drawing in has to enormously increase because what's thrown out is much less. Holding this balance is what defines your metabolic balance physically. but it also defines your metabolic balance psychologically. There are people who are always full of optimism, bursting with positivity and energy. That's your psychological metabolism, and it's the balance held by this samana. And shifting it or holding yourself there allows you to change your mood or change the balance of energies. If you're in a place which has high energy, you want to reduce how much you draw out. You want to push harder to expel because you're pushing against a pressure. So it's a very important function, and it maintains the balance overall between the individual finite knot and the universe. That's its primary base. But by controlling these two also. The third, the fourth function of the energy is this lifting movement of qualitative change of consciousness. Now I'm sliding into sleep. There's a sinking of grade of consciousness, even of quality of density of energy. You get dull. Now it's time to wake up. There's the shift upward of waking up to a brighter, higher grade. So, this dynamism between lower and higher grade, the flow from higher grade to lower, lower to higher, or the center which you hold of your awareness in it vertically oscillating, is this movement, upward rising current. That's why it's called Udana, rising up. And there are certain pranayam exercises which are designed to shift this upward, intensify the upward, and they bring clarity of mind, clarity of awareness. If you have a tendency to slide into inertia or pessimism, these bandhas, Uddiyana bandha, or the practices which lift the Vayu, will bring higher grade of awareness, lift you out from that dullness and so on. And it is this also which is used in the upward movement of ascension of grade of consciousness into the higher mind and beyond the mind. And so this is considered extremely important for the yoga upward rising of consciousness. And then there is the Viana, which is the movement spreading awareness into the body. It's the movement which, let's say, if I tell you to become conscious of your right hand index finger, your mind goes there, and now try to feel more intensely the awareness. Automatically, your awareness is flowing and it's leading energy there. And this movement of spreading of awareness and directing of energy is this Viana. The same thing can reverse, it can withdraw, and the same limbs become numb or semi conscious or dull. It fills in and everything becomes conscious, amplified, and bright. So the Viana has a strong connection to your engagement with the world and the intensification of the engagement or your withdrawal from the world. If you can manipulate the Viana, you can consciously will a certain part of your body to become insensitive and put it in a state of numbness for surgery. Or reverse it and put back the Viana, intensify it to put an intention or accelerate healing. Spread an idea or a mind intention or a particular quality of consciousness to different parts of the body from a mental intention or a mental formation. So it's a very powerful function. All five, you see, exist only because there is finite inside the infinite. And so all these operations become necessary. Take it out to the infinite domain and you find the first three have no relevance, the fourth and fifth have a very different meaning. But this is to explain what happens when the vital body, which is more closely connected with the physical, engages and binds its at least a part of itself into form, it undergoes these. Why is this important? Because this is your link from the physical to vital. If in this link processes of life force, you can manipulate the life energies, you can awaken your consciousness, you can direct your consciousness, you can change your physical consciousness, and this is the method of Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga says, look, your life force is your key. It's what changes your mind, it's what controls your body. And the life force is embedded in the physical body through these five functions and their secondary operations. If I can seize those functions by physical process, your physical breathing is a physical link to your life force. Through those, I can now get a grip on the vital. And through asanas, I can get a grip on the vital functions on all the parts and all the centers through which it plugs into your physical. And then I can activate them and turn the Udana movement, Viana movement, as a result, change the quality of your consciousness, wake you up, and awaken your mastery of the vital body, and through it, the mastery of the mental, and through it, the access to the spiritual. And it's doable because the vital body has such a strong, deep plug into the physical. And that is what Sri Aurobindo is pointing to here. It is more closely connected with the physical or food sheets and forms with it the gross body of our complex existence. These two together make for this base into which the mind then infuses, and the mind feels almost like a separate life. And that's why we can say, I have a mental life, I have a physical life, and the emotional life is in a large part really part of your mental life. And there is a split in your consciousness between these two domains. They represent the first two steps of evolution: physical life, mental life, leading to the third step, spiritual life. The three steps of Vishnu in the ascension of evolution. So, this is our complex existence. Why he introduces this term? Because all these are interconnected, making for a very complex. You can't speak of three only, you can't speak of two only. Each of these leaning into the other makes for a grade which is distinctly a mix of these two but with distinct characteristics. So, from the physical turning to the vital, there is a vital physical. From the physical turning to the mind, there is a mental physical. Similarly, from the vital turning to the physical, there is a physical vital. And the vital turning to the mind, there is a mental vital. And the mind turning to the vital and physical makes for the physical mind and physical vital. In all, making for 9 gradations already. And then nuances within them and so on. And into that comes the soul's influence and the ranges within where you get influences from the vital worlds and mental worlds and your fellow men. And then there is the higher influence from above. All this makes for this complex existence. Yes. Yes. So we come now to the question of where are the chakras in this, which is exactly what he takes up next. So, in the next sentence, these, that is the vital and mental bodies, these possess powers, senses, capacities, which are always secretly acting in us, are connected with and impinge upon our physical organs and the plexuses of our physical life and mentality. So, from these two, there is the imprint influence on the physical organs and then on the plexuses of our physical life and mentality. And this pointing to the fact that in the physical body, remember we had the physical life, physical mind, which makes for this gradation, which feels bodily. From here, there is separately the vital body and mental body, and the link between these are the plexuses, as well as they have direct links to organs. So the plexus, we speak of 6 in the physical body and a few more above and below the physical body in the subtle body. But separately, there are secondary plexuses or tertiary plexuses. So in the science of the subtle body and the subtle physical, the part of the physical which opens to these most easily, we describe flows of nervous energies, not the physical nerves, but the nadi. They are life force of a grade very close to the physical, but they're taking place in these in the subtler layer of the physical. But they have their own complex, let's say, nadi system. We will not say nervous system, but nadi system. And where nadis cross, there are special focal points. And action there will affect two very different processes. And where nadis cross, three crossings, they are more concentrated focal points. And where they grow more than three or four, and they are a complex network of connections, those are what we call the chakras. And so they are the link point between this physical, vital, physical, mental, to the actual free mental body. So it's as if we can speak of a mental life and a physical life, and the two are plugged in into each other through these link points. Through the link points, the things of the inner realms, of the inner vital, inner mental, etc., which are lived in those bodies, they flow into your surface physical, vital, physical, mental life. A little bit of that leaks in through these centers primarily because the chakras are the large center points, but then there are secondary center points, like the palm is one of the secondary centers. You'll find one here in the elbow. These are soft spots where you will instinctively feel vulnerable in the face of danger, especially when you feel a strong negative space or energy. Instinctively you close, you block this, you close your palm, you close like this, you curl up slightly as if to protect from an energy, because these are the centers through which we receive more easily. So they have these secondary centers, and then even fingertips have centers through which you can feel energy flow out. I think all of us have had that experience where you feel as if your energy draining out, and instinctively you close your fist to prevent the draining of energy. So there are also tertiary centers. So there's a whole science, and if I remember right, there are 108 centers, and that's an interesting number. And there is a whole science, marma vidya, because each of these centers is called marma, where unlike acupuncture where you stick needles, here they directly punch with energy. So the needle punching also, you will notice, it has a place, but it's not the needle which does it. It's the energy that you stick with the needle which does it. So the effective acupuncturist must be as much an energy healer as an acupuncturist, except now he's concentrating on these secondary and tertiary energy flows and working through them on the body. When he punches a needle, he punches an energy burst into it. The same thing an acupressurist does. When he presses you, he's punching his energy into you, and there's a ripple which follows the nadis. You can often feel the nadis. So there are interesting experiments being done today, and I saw a presentation of one of these in the recent conference where I was. What they did was they triggered one of the centers of the acupuncture point, and the result was they could see in the physical body a heating up of the entire meridian of the nadi. So literally, it's on the borderline of the physical, and so you can see its physical effect when it is energized, in a slight heating of the physical body. But it's also the link with the subtle. So it's that in between passage. When these are largely closed, the inner life is closed to you, and you're unconscious of things which happen there. When these begin to open or they grow, and there is more of a in and out passage, we become aware of those realms, and with it, even the powers which belong naturally to those bodies. So, this next sentence we will dwell upon next time. But you see, we're entering a domain of great value. At the very least, you can have a more rich and complete experience of the world. And from a spiritual perspective of the integral yoga, you have now the spiritual consciousness has to enter each of these domains and each of these functions and lift and spiritualize and transform them. So there are two objectives here. First, which he describes later, by self development, we can become aware of them, possess our life in them, get through them into conscious relation with the life world and other worlds, and use them also for a more subtle experience and more intimate knowledge of the truths, facts, and happenings of even the material world itself. Through those bodies, you can know things of the material world. We can, by this self development, live more or less fully on planes of our existence other than the material, which is now all in all to us. And if these bodies exist in us, if these bodies have these greater powers and senses and capacities, well, we should be able to live in them and exercise them to have a more complete experience of the universe, which is the intention in our evolution. So, just to put this in context, Sri Aurobindo explains all the capacities held in the subtle body, creeping out now through these centers and organizing into the physical life, are the future evolution. Every faculty we have today was earlier present in the subtle body, unorganized here. When it came out and organized itself here, was our evolution. So, evolution is taking place here on the surface, but the potential of what we are evolving to is already held in the subtle bodies. And so, our awakening to it and our drawing out those powers into action is really an acceleration of our evolution, but of our physical outer evolution, not of our spiritual evolution, which is a different thing. That then will take up this more developed instrument and bring into it the spiritual transformation. But to have a weak, undeveloped instrument gives a very poor base for spirit, which is infinite and has so much greater potentiality. To have a strong and well developed, rich instrument here gives for the spirit a greater and fuller amplitude in its expression in the world. So that's why we see the importance of this. We'll continue this next Friday. We've already crossed our time, and maybe if there are any questions, we can take them up next time. It's a fascinating passage, very suggestive. Sri Aurobindo condenses so deeply, you have to pause and dwell on each word and relate to his expansions of some of these ideas in other places, in his other writings. And then you see how much he has held together, linking all these threads with a few brief, consolidated but rich statements.
Thank you for sharing this, Jane.